New leadership in Japan, what to expect for the United States, Korea, and the region. Next on The Impossible State. North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become one of the United States' top national security priorities. Each week on this show, we'll talk to the people who know the most about North Korea. Welcome to another episode of the CSIS Impossible State podcast. I'm your host, Victor Cha, President of Geopolitics and Foreign Policy and Korea Chair at CSIS and Professor at Georgetown. Today's conversation is about the new election in Japan. The newly elected leader of Japan's ruling Democratic Party, Sanae Takaichi, did I say that right? Yes. Sanae Takaichi, who is most likely to become the next prime minister following the parliamentary vote later this month. And so we want to talk about this new leader and what it means for the United States, what it means for Korea, both North and South, what it means for China, the region more broadly. And I could not have thought of 2 better people to bring together for this conversation today. James Brady is Vice President in Geopolitical Risk for the global CEO advisory firm Teneo, where he leads Japan's analysis and also covers the Korean Peninsula. He holds a doctorate from Osaka University, and he is the author of a book on the political economy of agriculture in Japan. That, I did not know you did that, James.
It was a very hot topic back in the day.
Okay, all right. Also joining us is Tobias Harris. He is founder and principal of Japan Foresight, LLC. He is also a senior advisor for Japan at Aurora Macro Strategies, was also formerly a Teneo person, so it's Teneo Day here at CSIS. Yeah. Tobias wrote a fantastic book on Shinzo Abe, the iconoclast, Shinzo Abe and New Japan, that was published by Hearst in 2020. And he did his graduate work at University of Cambridge and also his BA at Brandeis University. So thank you both for joining us. I can only imagine it's been a very busy time for both of you with this election that's just taken place within the LDP. And so if we could just pull up the graphic that we have here. So these were the numbers as we saw them in the LDP election vote, with Takaichi getting 31%, Shinjiro Koizumi at 27, almost 28%. And I don't know, I follow this as a novice. You guys are the experts. But I think the verdict was this was a little bit of a surprise. Like, people didn't know that this was necessarily that this was going to happen. So I guess the first question is, like, why did this happen? How did this turn out this way before we move on to what the implications are? So who wants to start? James, you want to start?
Sure. I would say it was a surprise. In a sense, Takaichi feels like the candidate for the moment, because the big sort of trend in the last year or so particularly has been the rise of the fringe right, Sanseito, and this further right area of the political spectrum. And she was the candidate that most speaks to that and most gives the LDP the best chance to regain those voters. So there is a certain logic there. But if you look at the party, the supporters of hers at the grassroots are probably maybe the largest bloc and the most enthusiastic bloc. But overall, we see maybe about half the party are still sort of more moderate. And then at the grassroots level, if we look at the parliamentary party, I think we still see the majority then would be more moderate. And we would have expected Koizumi particularly, maybe Hayashi, certainly if one of those candidates had run alone and without the other, that they would have won the election. What sort of happened, I think, in the end was that Takaichi got a little bit lucky. She got the momentum from a strong vote in the grassroots. Her share with the grassroots in the last 3 leadership elections have gone from about 20% to 30% to 40%. So she's got momentum there as she appears to be the candidate of the grassroots party. And that allowed her then also looking back last year, she won a plurality of the grassroots votes in the first round, but then was essentially denied by the parliamentary party in the second round. So she was able to say, well, I've been denied in the past. Her supporters were able to say she's the candidate of the moment, and was able to kind of bounce between this divided moderate bloc. And I don't feel that there's been a major shift in the LDP towards the right, anything like that. I think she just happened to be a strong candidate with momentum who got kind of lucky because of how the moderates vote split in the two rounds.
I mean, Tobias, so anything you want to add to what James said, but also what does this mean for Koizumi going forward?
Sure. Yeah. Just I really want to stress. I think James makes a great point that there was a lot of contingency here. The fact that Hayashi and Koizumi really were not able to coordinate. The fact. I mean, I think you even look at some of the prefectural level results. If a few votes, a relatively small number of votes in a number of prefectures had gone a different way, Koizumi might have won those. And the important thing, the reason why the prefectural vote mattered so much is that a lot of Diet members actually ended up taking their cue from how their prefectures voted in the second round. So Takaichi actually, I mean, Koizumi's strength in the last two leadership elections that he's run in has been with the parliamentary party. He's well liked by his colleagues. I think they view him as a potential asset to help them win. But a lot of sort of on the fence moderates in the second round, they saw how the prefectures voted. They saw, well, wow, she won everywhere. She won 36 prefectural chapters. Therefore, I've got to just kind of follow that wave. And so she ended up really taking advantage of the fact that prefectural vote was divided between Hayashi and Koizumi. There was a lot of talk, I think, before the leadership election that she might lose votes on the right to Kobayashi Takayuki, the young, now the LDP's policy chief. And it turned out that he had a negligible presence in the race, whereas Hayashi was just strong enough to siphon votes away from Koizumi, but not really strong enough to win himself. And so that really, I mean, there was a lot of contingency, and therefore one should be reluctant to not make assumptions about the direction the LDP has moved one way or another because of this election. As far as Koizumi's future, he's 44, so he is still going to be a factor. He's still, he's got a pretty strong base within the party. He has shown that. I think, we've now seen, I think, in a couple elections in a row, he has some work to do on the grassroots. I mean, that was really what undid him last year, where he really his poll numbers sort of slid heading into the final vote, and it really looked like he was going to be an also ran even before the voting started. This year, it looked in polls like he was holding up better, and then there were a couple missteps. There was a little incident where it appeared that his communications director for his campaign was trying to encourage people to make fake comments on a news or supportive comments on a news program. So I mean, just it doesn't seem like the organic support at the grassroots level is there, and some of that just might be that his youth, he doesn't look like a leader yet. That he's so young. He needs maybe there's just a feeling that he needs more seasoning. His father, the former Prime Minister Junichiro, came out a day or two ago and said, he didn't talk to me, but I really think he shouldn't have ran. So there's a feeling, I think, that he has struggled to overcome that. Maybe he's not quite ready yet, and give him a little more time, a little more experience, and maybe grassroots voters will take him more seriously.
Interesting. So here we have a graphic that shows the local party chapter votes, and we see how Takaichi dominated Koizumi when it came to the local party chapter votes. Can I ask you both, so I think many of our viewers and listeners really don't know much about Takaichi. Who is she? What is she like? What is her background? Who is she as a person?
Well, she is from Nara, which I think is an important part of her identity. It's it's a very historic part of Japan, and people from Nara have a long sense of Japanese history that she seems to inform her. She's also coming from the Kansai region. She's a Hanshin Tigers baseball fan, so she's quite famous for that. She's known, for her love of sports cars. She's known for her love of drumming. She was a heavy metal drummer famously in her younger days. I guess in many ways she's the person who's taking the baton from Abe now. She's the flag bearer, I think, for Abe's agenda. She's a social conservative. She shares Abe's nationalism, patriotism, his view of the state, a powerful state working to protect the people. I think her policy interest, she's known for her knowledge of policy detail, particularly in areas that relate to things like economic security. So she's famous for having a great knowledge of facts and figures and policies and so on around that. And I think probably, and maybe Tobias can give his view, but I would say that she's probably got the strongest personal following of a politician in Japan since Abe. Certainly not to his level, but her supporters are very passionate about her. They think she's kind of the hope for the more conservative wing of the LDP going forward, and I think she's well respected among that wing, and then even outside the party on the right. So, what would you?
I mean, I think there's a few other things to flag about her, and I think this probably explains some of the passion I think that her supporters have. She's not a hereditary politician in a party where that still is something that sets you apart. That's something that Abe, of course, is a dynast. Koizumi is a dynast. You have all these politicians who you look at their names and you know their background. And she comes from a relatively modest middle class background. Really had to work her way up. To the policy detail. I mean, she really is a policy wonk, and actually, people who really know Japanese politics will know that she's a graduate of the Matsushita School of Government and Management. So this sort of training academy. Noda, the leader of the Constitutional Democrats, went there. A lot of sort of notable Japanese politicians have passed through there. So she wound her way there. She actually spent time. She worked in the U.S. Congress as a congressional fellow. Just has been in politics for a long time, has a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, but does have this sort of salt of the earth kind of grassroots connection, these passions that I think, she is free to share. And so that really explains, I think, why she's been able to tap into really that strong following. I think the question that we don't really know about her is whether, Abe, as committed of an ideologue he was, and he was someone who really was great at sort of spinning these big visions for the way the country should go. He was also able to, he was a skilled pragmatist, and he got better at it as his career went on. He really understood, how to thread the needle between, I have ideals and I have the vision that I'm pursuing, but also, I'm the government of this entire country, and I have to be responsible for a lot of different competing interests, and I have to find a way to sort of navigate interest and reality and interest and ideal. And I don't know if we know her, does she have the ability to do that? We know her as, this very committed ideologue. I don't know if we just don't know. She's not been really in a position where she has had to really make those kind of compromises.
Yeah. Let me ask you, following up on that, Tobias, so the LDP Komeito, will the Komeito be able to work with the LDP going forward given the situation? Maybe a lot of it depends on her, but is that something that's...
I mean, so literally as we're speaking, I mean, this is actually, a huge question. And I mean, without getting completely down the rabbit hole of the long history of the LDP's relationship with Komeito, but they said before the LDP leadership election that they would think twice about working in coalition with a right-wing LDP leader. So they sent that message. It was unclear how serious the threat that was. And in the days since she was elected, it actually sounds like that was a serious threat. And they are taking a more bare knuckle approach to coalition negotiations than they have in the past. I mean, even with Abe, I mean, they got they found ways of getting along with Abe and working together. And some of that is just, Komeito has changed. It's aging, its electoral strength has declined. A lot of, I think, rank and file supporters of Komeito are frustrated with the LDP scandals of the recent years, and the feeling that Komeito has been, responsible for basically covering for a party that has lost touch with the public. And I think there's a feeling in the party that, if we remain allied with an LDP that is now led by someone whose values are very different from ours, that we're really gonna suffer, and we're gonna suffer at the polls next time around. And so there's sort of this identity crisis going on. And in the immediate term, the most immediate impact of that is because they have not renewed that coalition agreement yet, that there's not an agreement on when to actually open the diet session that will make Takaichi prime minister. So it was originally supposed to be the 15th. Saw this morning. Now they're saying that date could slip to the 20th, or it's not really clear exactly how those negotiations will resolve. And even if Komeito stays in the coalition, clearly we are now seeing that sort of like the foundations crumbling. That their ability to cooperate in the ways that they have. They've been in coalition for more than 25 years. I mean, this is a very old partnership, but clearly there's a lot of fraying. And even if they stay together, how hard can Takaichi push to get what she wants? Are they going to push back? Are they going to threaten to leave? How is that government going to work? And recall that neither, even together, they don't have a majority in either house of the Diet. So, Takaichi, this is a major contrast to Abe. Abe had, enormous majorities in both houses of the Diet, was able to really govern the Diet, control the legislative process. She is taking power without that. There are no assurances, there's no guarantees about her ability to move things through the Diet, and that is going to make an enormous difference for her to actually realize some of the things that she says are her priorities.
Mm-hmm. And so, James, just to following up on this, so what does that mean for like Sanseito, if whether they have or don't have a coalition? As Tobias said, they still don't have the majority. So, what does all this mean for Sanseito? Because Takaichi, I would imagine, as she becomes the prime minister, right? Politicians, as they're rising, they tend to sort of go to the polls, but when they actually win the election, they come into the leadership, they got to moderate. So that would mean trying to maybe distance from Sanseito. Well, what are your thoughts on this?
It's interesting. I think in the case of Takaichi, she was more polarizing, or she certainly tended towards the more hardline views, I think, prior to the most recent election. The fact that she lost the previous election to Ishiba, I think she realized that she had to moderate a little bit. And one feature of the election was that it was true of Koizumi, it was true of Takaichi and others. It was a very toned down sort of political discussion. And I think everyone really wanted to make themselves as appealing to as many people in the party as possible. So we've had a very colorful Takaichi in the past. I think what we had was a more grayscale Takaichi in this electoral campaign. And the question now is, which version we're going to see going forward. I would entirely agree with Tobias. I think that in policy terms, Takaichi and Abe are really quite similar, but Abe was certainly the more skillful politician. He had a stronger filter. We've cases of Takaichi saying things which have ended up sounding quite provocative, whether she meant them that way or not. And so the issue that she has to face now is to triangulate between compromise with Komeito, and maybe I'm a little bit more bullish than Tobias on the likelihood of continued coalition, because I think that Komeito have been going through so many structural and other changes that they really, it would be quite damaging electorally for them to step away from the government. And they've got a lot of bargaining power now to leverage over Takaichi if they stay in. The more that she compromises towards the center, that compromises then her ability to appeal to the right. I think what she's got in her favor now is that actually her image is of someone who's quite tough and quite harsh, and maybe more so than Abe, despite being quite similar in policy terms. I think if she can play that to her advantage, if she can play up her image while not giving away too much in substance, that she can still use her authority and her appeal on the right to take some of the momentum away from Sanseito. If she does work with them, compromise on some things, there's discussions around the Foreign Agent Registration Act, like the US has, on maybe limiting foreign purchases of residential properties and things like that. If she can kind of cooperate and co-opt them a little bit into the process, then the LDP essentially under Takaichi would be offering something quite similar and actually delivering to what Sanseito is offering. And I think that would help sort of reduce their momentum at the polls. But she just needs to triangulate how far to go in that direction versus how much substantively to give, because I think Komeito are watching her very closely in those very same areas, things like whether she visits Yasukuni, whether she brings back the Abe factionalists who were implicated in the slash fund scandal and so on. So she's got a lot of calculations to take.
Just on this Sanseito question, I mean, and I think, it's sort of a separate question than parliamentary management, because Sanseito ultimately doesn't actually have that much to offer in terms of votes for things. But I think in terms of appealing to Sanseito voters, and I think if you listen to Kamiya, the leader of Sanseito, talk about this, he's saying it's not just about policy. That they've been building a party, from the bottom up, for almost a party speaking to kind of the voiceless, people who've been overlooked by the system. And I think the risk that Takaichi, I think, is running, what we've seen in the last few days, is in relying on ASO and the ASO faction, and of course, bringing Hagiuda is back in a party role, bringing back some of these scandal implicated Abe faction people, that she's going to actually help make Sanseito's point that, look, this is who the LDP is. It's faction ridden. It's this old guard. Even Takaichi claims that she's offering something new. She's different. Ultimately, it's the same old LDP. It's the same. This is why we had to make a new party, and I think that's what Kamiya said in recent days. That whatever his effect. Yes, Takaichi has great policies. I agree with her on lots of things, but it's still the same old LDP. And so there's a risk, aside from all of the policy questions, that just in terms of the image of the party. I mean, that ultimately. If you look at the report that the LDP produced, why did we lose the upper house election? I mean, losing right-wing voters, to parties like the Democratic Party for the People and Sanseito was one reason, but it was one among, a dozen different reasons. And a lot of it had to do with modernizing the party's image, showing that it was responsive, that it was able to listen to voters. And I think there's a real risk too, that in trying to reach some of those right-wing voters they've lost, that they end up losing other voters. They end up sort of pushing other voters away. And maybe it's all just sort of it comes out in the wash, that, okay, maybe they lose some Komeito voters, and some moderate conservatives say, hey, actually, Noda, he's a moderate conservative. I kind of like him. Maybe, some go that direction. And we saw, I think, a little bit of that in the general election last year. So you just wonder, in sort of choosing one rabbit to chase, how many others, will get away as a result of sort of, gambling on Takaichi's answer to the party's crisis, which is we just need to bring the conservatives back. And that I think is a question that, we'll see in the next few months.
Sounds like really acute political skills to manage something like that, and which are still really untested for her, right? But what we see is like she rose on this grassroots support that got her where she is now. So the tests are really going forward. Let me ask you about relations with the United States. What does her leadership mean for the alliance, for the trade investment agreement? Do you think there would be a change, or that she would still be very much in favor of what's been negotiated already by her predecessor?
So I think we can say that the alliance is certainly a major concern of Takaichi through her life. Tobias mentioned that she had spent some time working in DC as a congressional aide, and she came to that position, I think, because she wanted to understand how Japan was being seen in the US, and what the issues around that were, and really sort of get to the bottom of that. So, that's something that I think has guided her life trajectory. She, like Abe, would share the view of the necessity of the US-Japan alliance. She would also think that Japan needs to have a strong role, a degree of strategic autonomy to be able to stand up for itself. And so, I think when she was on record as, first of all, criticizing the trade and investment deal, and then she kind of rolled back on that a little bit and was praised Ishiba for his negotiations. I think she's going to be a sort of pragmatic continuation of what we've seen with recent LDP leaders. She's certainly a pro-alliance. She will want to try to recapture that Abe-Trump friendship that's sort of paradigmatic now in Japanese politics. Who can be the Trump whisperer? Motegi in the election race tried to portray himself as that role. I think Takaichi has got some particular skills that would help her there. Her social conservatism, I think, even her critics would never accuse her of being woke. And so I think that, she can certainly say that that she shares a kind of social conservative view. I think her nationalism, her patriotism, is something that she could sort of say ties in with the Trump administration's view, and I think as well her view that Japan should be a strong Japan, a Japan that is potentially able to act with a degree of independence. I certainly think she would be open to higher defense spending towards the Trump administration's goal of 4 or 5%, although I think there are fiscal restraints that mean that it's unlikely she'll be able to make much movement there in practice. But I think if her advisors are skillful in portraying her core beliefs, I think there's a lot of commonality there with the Trump administration. She'll certainly want to have a good relationship. I think there's the space to have it. And I think those kind of past criticisms that we might have seen around things like the trade investment deal, I think those will start getting downplayed now as she faces the realities of being a prime minister who has to manage Japan's most important bilateral relationship.
So President Trump's going to meet her fairly soon, right? So Tobias, how do you think that's what do you think the dynamic's going to be like? You said she spent a year on the Hill. Like, how's her English? Does she play golf?
I'm not expecting they're going to be playing golf. Look, I think in the near term, I think there's reasons for being bullish about their ability to get along, in a near term. And I think for a lot of the reasons, James talked about, I think, look, I think Trump has a genuine affection for Abe still. I think when we've seen in these meetings with Ishiba, and he starts, going on about how much, how fond he was of Abe and, missing him. And
it's like President Bush had this fondness for Koizumi. Like, even after he met Abe, after Abe succeeded him, he still talked about Koizumi. Same thing.
Yeah. I think that affection and the fact that Takaichi was truly, one of Abe's most loyal lieutenants, that I think will do a lot of favors, just in terms of a kind of basis for a relationship, and I'm sure people will be whispering in Trump's ear about, how close, that bond is. This is someone who, had Abe's blessing. Abe in 2021, when she first ran for the leadership, Abe was running her campaign and working the phones. So there's a real affinity there that will be an asset. And I think some of the, the ideological concurrence will help, and the fact that Takaichi, I think, is likely to be committed to doing some of the things that Trump wants Japan to do anyway. I think over the longer term, the question is, and this is just in the Japanese right, there is this tension between, we know the importance of the United States as an ally. We're most committed to, being a good ally and being devoted to that alliance. But then, at times where there is friction, there is, we're the most stalwart defenders of Japan's national interests, and that's fine when the U.S. is doing things that are supportive of Japan's national interests. But when you do have friction, whether it's trade friction or whether it's security demands that the government of the day doesn't feel able to meet, they're also going to be the ones who say, we're going to defend Japan's national interests from unfair demands. And it was notable that during the campaign, yes, Takaichi has walked back what she said, but she said, if it looks like an unequal treaty, I'm going to, I'll be willing to renegotiate that. And that kind of nationalism, that sort of pokey, spiky nationalism where, we're going to defend our national interests if it comes down to it. If there are demands that just are impossible for Japan to meet, you might get a desire or a need to push back in response to that down the road. I don't think that's going to happen in 2 weeks, when they meet. But just the potential for friction when you have kind of two nationalists meeting and a clash between those national interests. There is a potential, I think, for that to cause a little distance, a little friction.
Okay. Terrific. Very interesting. So let me now ask you about relations in the region. So impossible state, many of our listeners are interested in Korea. So what do we think is going to be the relationship between Takaichi and the new government in South Korea? Of course, there was I think for the South Koreans, she's been painted sort of as very far to the right, the visits to Yasukuni and things. Will she continue the trilateral stuff? It was a relief for many in D.C. when President Lee came into office, and the first thing he did, his first foreign trip, was to Japan and reaffirming the trilateral. So where do we think that's going to go? So, James.
Let me make the positive case.
Okay.
I think the positive case is that Takaichi is certainly a China hawk. She's certainly a Japanese nationalist, but she's not a South Korea hawk. And that there have been frictions around, her actions around Yasukuni. She said even in the leadership race, she endorsed cabinet ministers attending Takashima Day, which would obviously cause a lot of problems in Seoul. I think she's slightly unfiltered, but I think her overarching sense is around Japan's security, and her concern is China, and now obviously closer cooperation with North Korea, with Russia. I think she understands that South Korea now in the trilateral and then working bilaterally, it's in both countries' national interest to continue that. So it would be surprising for me if she decided, I think she's going to be tempered a little bit around her actions. Already, the reports today were suggesting that she's sort of thinking not to visit Yasukuni in the near term. We're in this interregnum where Ishiba is the prime minister and Takaichi is the leader of the LDP. Abe, after getting elected leader of the LDP and before he became prime minister, did visit Yasukuni. And then 1 year after taking office, he visited again, and that caused a lot of problems. I think Takaichi is aware that if she does visit at this point, what's going to happen? We're going to have the APEC summit at the end of the month. We're going to have Trump coming. That would be a high risk strategy, and she apparently, according to the reports today at least, seems to be rowing back a little bit on that. Even her likely chief cabinet secretary was due to visit Taiwan this week, and he's reportedly now not going out of consideration of China. So I think we're seeing a degree of pragmatism, perhaps, as the responsibilities of the office start to constrain her. So I'm going to say that the positive case is that her concern with Japan's national security is clear. Even she met on a personal level. She said to have met a South Korean diplomat earlier this year. She spoke about the potential for the two sides to work together on economic security matters, and I think she said some positive things about her interest in Korean culture and so on. I'm going to say the positive case is that she sees, just I think as President Lee has done, that now continuing this cooperation that their two predecessors have put into motion is really in both countries' interests. And so I would be a little bit surprised if she did anything that kind of shook up the Japan-South Korea relationship in the near term.
No, both of them, Lee when he was campaigning and Takaichi when she was campaigning, did sort of come out on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Lee was actually very against sort of what Yoon had done on Japan and Takaichi, but once they become the leaders, then they start to moderate.
And just to add to that, I think if they can work together, the symbolism of that, because they come from such different ends of the spectrum,
that would be something. Yeah.
If they can carry that on, I think that will be very powerful, and that would really help embed the relationship going forward.
Yeah, that would be potentially a first. I can't even think of another case with a progressive leader in South Korea and a conservative in Japan. That would be interesting. Tobias, your thoughts on that, and then also on North Korea.
I mean, it's an opportunity maybe for Takaichi to use her respect and admiration for Abe to maybe a positive end, in that, and she talked about this more in a China context, but that Abe recognized the importance of getting along with China while also recognizing the security threats. She could very easily take that and go to Lee and go to South Korea with the same kind of thinking, that actually the security environment being what it is, we need all the friends we could get. There's clearly been a lot of work already done in this relationship. What I don't have a good sense for, James, I don't know if you have a better sense of this, but I feel like not too long ago, the consensus in sort of the Tokyo national security establishment was, South Korea can't really be trusted. They're too close to China, and clearly that's changed. And there's been enough change in Tokyo to enable, now two prime ministers to really commit to that. I don't know if the right wing still has come around to a more pragmatic view of South Korea as a whole. So who's going to be whispering in her ear about the reliability of South Korea as a partner? I don't know, but I don't think James, I don't think you're wrong to say that there's a case for her actually using this as an opportunity to show her pragmatism, that she's willing to, because it's in the interest of national security, because ultimately this is about ensuring that Japan, as it faces these three nuclear powers right at its doorstep, that it does need friends. And so I think there's an argument there. On the North Korea, clearly abductees are still, they're still, there as the issue that the Japanese government can't get past. And Victor, you might have a better sense of this, but it certainly doesn't seem that there's any particular desire on North Korea's part, that Japan doesn't have anything that North Korea is terribly interested in right now. I mean, that there's not a particular, rush to talk to Tokyo. They're not particularly eager to go through another round of talks sort of circling around this abductee question. And so I don't expect that Takaichi is going to dramatically change what we've seen over the last number of years now, I guess, on that front.
Yeah. And then finally, what about on China? I mean, you've referred to it a couple of times already in the conversation, but do you think what we'll see from Takaichi is what we saw from Abe with regard to China? So, very strong on national defense, but pragmatic at the same time. And then there's the economic security and supply chain piece of this. So.
Yes, just and to tie that into Tobias's point, I think that in Tokyo circles, I think the concern in relation to South Korea was the fact that the presidency can change every 5 years, the pendulum can swing. And I think the fact that Lee has come in as a progressive, but yet he's committed to maintaining this good relationship. We saw he went to Tokyo, as you mentioned, first before visiting President Trump. He had another meeting with Ishiba then just last week. I think that that's going to help demonstrate good faith on the South Korean side, which will kind of reassure the Japanese right that actually, if we do make a deal with one side in an administration, that will last and continue into the next administration. It's just an aside, but I almost think, and I think Lee spoke about this during his campaign of changing the presidency from 1 5-year term to 2 4-year terms. And I think something like that actually would kind of help the relationship with Japan, because it would give greater continuity and a greater sense of planning if they knew they could be dealing with the same partner over a long period. But I think in the same way, the fact that we have had this change of an administration, but a continuity of policy is going to help reassure going forward. And also Lee, his outreach towards China has not been unlimited. It's really about, I think, the economic partnership. And that's where he wants to improve that and to be pragmatic and so on. I think the fact that he's not completely shifted South Korean policy from the Yoon era, I think as well that's going to kind of be somewhat reassuring to the Japanese, because as we see the changing environment, I think it's important to pay attention to the fact, we have a stronger North Korea now. They've got this alliance with Russia, as well as their sort of quiet alliance with China, and they're all kind of working together a bit more closely. I think those all mitigate in favor of Japan and South Korea working together. And dare I say, maybe the two leaders, Lee and Takaichi, would share an understanding that they should have, pragmatic, constructive relations with China, particularly in the economic sphere, and then maybe use the economic security channel to work together with each other and with the U.S. more as well.
Do you think that there's you were saying, Tobias, we don't know yet when the LDP, when the election will be, when she will be installed as prime minister. Will it be before ASEAN and APEC and Trump's visit to the region? We hope so.
That was the goal. That was the
plan.
Yeah,
right?
That was the goal, that you would have prime minister in place and ready and able to attend East Asian Summit and APEC and be ready to meet with Trump. And I know there's now been several articles in the Japanese media about the foreign ministry fretting that they won't have time to give the prime minister proper briefings ahead of all of these these meetings. And so, no, there, I mean, there, which maybe to bring this conversation full circle, I mean, there are real consequences to, Japan being in this period of political instability. And, this has now been, for several years now. And it doesn't look like there's any sign that it's going to be resolved anytime soon. That this is, Abe was able to articulate this idea of, Japan really as a major leading voice internationally because of political stability. Japan ultimately, by the end of Abe's tenure, was probably the most stable democracy, in the G7, and that gave Japan a voice that it really had not had in the past. And what we're finding now is that because you have weaker leaders, because you don't have governments that have secure control of the diet, that you just, one, I think Japan is just a little more inward looking because the prime minister's time is now preoccupied with, do I have enough votes to get my budget through the diet? But also because, you don't have, you have these governments that are falling, quickly because they don't have, a really broad public mandate, that I think Japan's voice is maybe, if not missing internationally, I think it's not what I think its partners had hoped for in the past.
And such a critical moment, with like you said, with a lot of U.S. and President Trump's attention focused on Asia, a sequence of events, right? East Asia Summit, the trip to Japan, the trip to Korea, APEC. It sounds like he may not be there at APEC, but then a Quad leaders meeting perhaps later, and of course the Beijing trip in early 2026. For Japan not to be have all their ducks in a row politically at home, that's a real liability, right, going forward. So, well, there's a lot more to talk about this. This was really an education for me. I hope it was an education for you as well, on Japanese politics and the election of the new leadership. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Tobias and James, joining us for this episode of The Impossible State, and we'll see you soon.